I'm a pretty simple man. I see Samara Weaving, I watch the movie. Can we just get her in every horror movie ever going forward? I feel like that's not too much to ask for. So what is up, guys? Welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be reviewing one of Shudder's most recent releases called Azrael. Now, this movie came out in theaters for a couple of weeks, but for the most part, it's a Shudder exclusive, went right to Shudder a couple of weeks later. Stars Samara Weaving, I love the woman, she can't miss. And I'm going to do my best to describe this film to you guys because between you and me, I'm not really sure I knew what the fuck was going on in this. So in Azrael, we follow Samara Weaving playing the title character of the same name, and the movie takes place after the events of the Rapture. Again, apologies if I butcher this explanation, but to my understanding, the Rapture is the event of biblical times where everybody goes up to heaven, they're judged by God. All of the shitty people kind of stay behind all of the sinners. That's what happens in this film. They've even made movies about that called Left Behind, I'm pretty sure. And that's what you have in this film. You have an entire population of the worst, all left behind, all sinners. And their punishment for being sinners and not being chosen is that they cannot talk. You have an entire movie that has a lot of moving parts where there is no dialogue. The movie is completely dialogue free. It's almost as if all of the characters in this have no voice boxes or no vocal cords because they all just kind of hiss. So you're trying to understand this very deep and enriched lore of biblical times and some religious connotations going on, but there's no dialogue. That's kind of an issue in some ways. And I'm actually going to start off with my negatives in this review. I usually do it the other way. To the core, it's a pretty simple film. You have Samara Weaving's character trying to survive this satanic cult or this weird cult that's just after her. Again, it's the end of time, so you have a bunch of degenerates in the population. You have some people that are trying to be redeemed, but for the most part, these people just don't care. They've accepted they're stranded after, they're criminals, they're ruthless savages, and you're spending time watching Samara Weaving run away from these characters in this post-apocalyptic world. And in and of itself, that sounds pretty generic, and some of the movie is generic, but it does have its own original ideas a little bit farther into it than that. But once again, to the core, this is a very simple movie. It's just kind of convoluted and confusing because there's no dialogue to it. There's a lot of moving parts and just weird things going on in this. It is kind of hard to understand because there's no explanation or lore. For example, you have her character trying to survive this cult. Then you have these creatures, they don't really explain. If they did, I must have missed it. But these creatures that are kind of like zombies, they rip people to shreds, absolutely savage. And then you have some religious connotations going on with some overlying story. And then they have title and chapter cards splitting up this story into acts. And let me just rant for a quick second. Am I the only person who's getting sick of movies that are overusing that artistic style of stopping the film to add title cards and quotes in the middle of the film? Breaks up the run completely. It makes the acts feel completely separated to me. This movie just has like 4 or 5 times it stops the movie to give you a biblical quote, and I don't really think it adds to anything because, again, the story is pretty intentionally vague. And that's how I would describe this film, intentionally vague. And whenever a movie does that, you're instantly in two camps. You're either intrigued and you want to know more, or you're just confused and you kind of don't care. And a lot of the time I find myself in the intrigued camp. I'd be lying if I said I ever got there with this film. I was in that other camp where I was kind of just confused and didn't really know what was going on. So I kind of found it to be a turnoff that there was no dialogue after a certain point. The movie's enjoyable enough for what it is, but when you're watching it and you're trying to understand the layers of this biblical story, the religious connotations, I'm sure somebody out there picked up on it more than I did. I was really confused. This felt like a very run-of-the-mill story that just had a lot of moving parts, as I said. Her, the creatures, the religion, and then some of the other quotes they introduced to this and the way this film ends. There was just a lot of stuff going on that left me kind of saying like, what the fuck did I just watch? And not in the good way, not in the way that I would turn this movie on again immediately and just go back and revisit it, or I would look up theories online, kind of just, well, that's what it was, and I just turned it off and moved on with my life. This movie continuously presents questions and scenarios to the viewer that they have no interest in answering, and the viewer really never gets any answers about. You have these creatures, what's going on with them? Who is Samara Weaving's character? Why are we supposed to root for this character as the protagonist? We know who she is. We love Samara Weaving, great actress. So they're kind of cheating because we have a connection to her outside this film. But in this film, I have no idea who this character is, why I'm supposed to root for this protagonist. And to add a layer on top of the fact, this is where all of the shittiest people are. They've all been left behind. So why would I root for this person? I know there's a reason she didn't get into heaven if that's what the story of this is. So I know she's not a good character. I understand there's maybe a character arc where she's trying to be redeemed, or maybe she was better than interpreted. There's a lot of ways you could look at this. But for me, she comes off as a pretty unlikable character because I know who she's thrown in the lump with. And not to beat a dead horse, but that is the biggest issue I have with this film, and I think just about everybody, what they don't enjoy about it will be this. It's just so intentionally vague. You have people praying to this entity, or they're trying to be redeemed, or I'm not exactly sure, because again, it's just so confusing. It's not all bad though. There's some good stuff in here. The cinematography and the way this movie looks, it takes place deep in the woods. It's pretty cool. I am a sucker for post-apocalyptic horror, and this movie builds a cool enough world. I was engaged with that. Then you have Samara Weaving as our lead, and it has just been way too long since I've seen this woman in a lead. I love her. I think she's one of the best scream queens out. She's tasked with a lot. She has a steep uphill battle. No dialogue in this movie, and she's on screen basically every scene. So she has to do a lot. She has to portray this story. She has to portray her emotions, and it's all done through body language acting, which is just incredibly hard to do well. And she's able to do it again because she's a phenomenal actress. Once again, highlighting, we need to petition her to be in every horror movie. Every horror movie would just be better if it had Samara Weaving. I'm convinced of that. But yeah, this movie is very weird and it's very wild. It's kind of just moseying around in the post-apocalyptic world. You're following her character. These people are chasing after her. She runs into her boyfriend in a scene, and then you just randomly are presented with a scene where these creatures rip a guy limb from limb. They rip his head straight off, and I was like, okay. And it was that scene that kind of changed the trajectory of this film. From that point on, this movie just goes 0 to 100, does a complete 180, turns into an action thriller, gores through the roof, absolutely savage and brutal movie. Samara Weaving basically just becomes the Terminator in the final half hour of this film. So it feels like two entirely different films to me. You have a post-apocalyptic movie, you're following her trying to survive this people. Then the final half hour, she's just fighting back, ruthless, destroying everything in sight, and the gore and the practical effects are pretty fucking gnarly, if I'm not gonna lie. So this is a really hard one for me to describe because on one hand, I did find it enjoyable. I was never bored during this film, but I was definitely confused. I really didn't know what was going on, but I really think that's the purpose. I think it's trying to be intentionally vague. It's trying to get you to ask more, like you really want to know more. I never got to that point. I was just confused and I just wanted answers, and I'm always on the fence with how you feel about these films. That being said, I definitely think there's still some good stuff here. I would not be surprised if some people really like this film. Very unique because there is absolutely no dialogue to it. In a very familiar post-apocalyptic world, the cinematography is great. I didn't expect the gore to be so savage and gnarly. I thought the practical effects and how brutal it was gets really awesome in the third act. That being said, this movie was confusing and it's not one I probably would revisit. I would only watch this if you have nothing else to do. So if you guys have seen this one, comment down below and let me know what you thought of the whole dialogue-free thing, or just let me know what your favorite Samara Weaving movie is. If you haven't subscribed already, join me down below. That's all I got in this video. Peace!